Welcome to our 10th presentation. Today will be all about shoeing, thoughts about that. We will look at this from a Farrier's point of view, detriments about shoeing, and how to remove a shoe and what happens after you remove the shoe, or what could happen. So let's get started. It's a lot of material. Before we start, real quick, there will be no class next week. Just that you don't sit there and say, where is she? Next week is a break. After every 10 sessions we have a break. And at the moment the recording page is not working. I hope to have this remedied by the end of the day. That all sessions are working again. At the moment it doesn't. I had a major hiccup that I produced myself, so nobody to blame. But I will have this hopefully finished by the end of the day. Let's get started with thoughts about shoeing and what does the Farrier see. First of all, and I want to say this with all sincerity, not all Farriers are evil. Not even a percentage of Farriers are evil. Farriers work from a different point of view. If you subscribe very heavily to a naturopathic health environment, then you will also lean towards all medical doctors are evil, which they are not. They work from a different paradigm. They think a little bit different, they have learned something different, and this is what they know, and this is where they go. And for them it works. And I am not here to condemn the Farrier community. I am here to give you food for thought in case this would come up again, that you think, well, you know, my horse was really better off with shoes on. It was so much easier. So this is why we're going to discuss today a little bit where this whole shoeing thing leads us, in my opinion. Other people are of other opinions, and while I'm glad always to discuss this, I will not fight over it. Because that's a battle I cannot win. If somebody said this quite a while ago, but I thought it was right. If a horse owner believes that his horse needs shoes, and the farrier believes that this horse needs shoes, that horse needs shoes. And I'll leave this standing like that. So, first of all, I just transferred this PowerPoint that comes now in the next few slides to this platform, so I don't have to go back and forth. But this is a PowerPoint that a farrier, John McNerney, presented a while ago, and I just want to go with you real quick through this so that I can point out a few things. Some are very good, some don't work for us. John McNerney is a 2004 American Farriers team member. That's a prestigious title. And he talks in this PowerPoint about the anatomy of the horse and horse shoeing. So, first of all, for those of you who are not aware of it, the American Farriers Association is a huge organization. They have over 3,000 members, and they are organized. They have a magazine, they have annual meetings, they have a president, a vice president, they have elections. Everything seems to work. They do continuing education, they also certify farriers, they hold clinics, they hold huge competitions, and they do some research. So they are not just to be discarded as kind of them there. And the other question that I'm raising in that connection is, if tomorrow everybody would want to take the shoes off of their horses. Who would help them? It will take quite a while before more and more people will see that barefoot is the way to go. Unfortunately, it will take quite a few very lame horses and some setbacks in our community of barefoot trimmers, but it will happen over time. I really believe that there is a paradigm shift happening, and it is important that we as barefoot trimmers band all together, no matter which school we come from, and don't point out who is bad and who is good and who is right and who is wrong. If it's barefoot, it's right. So let's just go on with this. He talks about conformation with the same old good pictures, and that's the way the farrier industry in general sees a horse. And then here come a few anatomy slides. What's interesting to me when I look at these slides, all the terms are right. They're always depicted with a ground parallel coffin bone. Here is the ground parallel coffin bone again, this time on the hind foot. And then he talks about tendons and ligaments, and here's the ground parallel coffin bone. And then these are the coffin bones he shows, and this is the only hoof he shows from below without a shoe on. And what I see, personally, in these coffin bones is that they're all pathological, and in the hoof picture, this narrow frog is also not healthy. And this hoof is just prepared to nail the next shoe on. Or maybe he just took the shoe off and will prepare it. So I just deducted from the shavings here, from the rasp. That's what I thought. That's why I thought the hoof was prepared to get a new shoe on. So then he talks about sensitive structures. I'm not quite sure. While they know the terms, I'm not quite sure that every farrier knows what these structures do in the hoof and how they function and how the application of a shoe interacts with these structures. So the laminae are depicted here. You are absolutely familiar with this meanwhile. This is nothing new anymore. And then he talks about how the hoof works. Pressure comes in from the top, gets dissipated to the sides, and through the frog to the bottom. I find this interesting because this only works if there is no shoe. Then we have a hoof depicted here, and this is the misery of the entire industry in general, including the veterinarians, or a lot of veterinarians, because this is their model of a hoof. And in my book, this is a pathological hoof with very contracted heel bulbs and oblong instead of round. Even a hind foot shouldn't be that oblong. So the wall isn't even all around. So, you know, even so it's just a drawing, but this is what everybody is working from. Shoeing the horse happens in two parts, trimming and putting on the shoe. Okay, I can live with that. Then he comes with Xenophon, 2,400 years ago, said no hoof, no horse, which is also the website title of the American Farriers Association. So but in the time of Xenophon, 2,400 years ago, there were no shoes. So to quote him is more for us than for the farrier industry. But what Xenophon did say, because maybe we'd never mention him again, that you should keep your horse on large round rocks. When you're working with him, when you're grooming him, you should just keep him exercised on large round rocks, because that would strengthen the ligaments and the tendons and the hoof capsule. And that's all he had to say about hoof care, and to take good care of the hoofs. But they certainly didn't. They certainly did not have shoes on. If any one of you wants to say something during the presentation, would you please, instead of raising your hand, type it in the question box. I can see it there, and then I can answer it in between. I cannot call on you in between. Just a side remark. Then he says that the trim is to remove excess length and to remove dishes and flares. I have no problems about that. Nothing said about balancing, but so he does remove the excess length, but not excessively. That's a good thing. And then he dresses the dishes and flares. Here in the front of that right hoof, he has addressed the dish in the front, and maybe some flares on the back. In the process, the whole hoof wall was rasped all the way up here and got a little bit thinner, which is not such a good thing. So I like to say, because Christina just says something about the audio having been off for a little while, this may be individually. If you have your cell phone close by, if you have anything else running close by, I have to turn my external hard drive off, or my audio goes out. Stuff like that interferes sometimes with the audio, so if you look around and you put all those extra gadgets out of the way, it may work a little bit better. But thank you for bringing this to my attention. So thinning the hoof wall doesn't help the entire stability of the hoof. Then he says that we should protect the hoof from undue wear. That's a wonderful idea. There's no question about it. But when the horse stands still, it doesn't wear. When the horse is working in a soft arena, it doesn't wear. When the horse is walking around on grass, it doesn't wear. So, and most of the horses that are in such under such conditions are shod. So again, he comes from a different paradigm. And he says he would shoe when the wear exceeds the growth. Yeah, or when the customer requires it or asks for it. My farrier of 13 years has never once asked me what I intend to do with the horse that he shoes. He just nailed shoes on. It didn't matter. So I wonder if this gentleman asks. The shoeing goals is to protect the foot, to fit the foot. That is something about fitting the shoe, and keep the foot safe. These are all admirable traits, and if you have no other information, as a horse owner, you would certainly be off well to follow this thought pattern, because you want to keep your foot safe. And the word shoe in itself has a kind of a safety connotation for us, versus in German it is the straight translation would be a hoof iron. And that sounds much more drastic in my mind than a shoe. A shoe is something that protects your sensitive feet from getting hurt. But you wouldn't put iron on your feet to be protected from getting hurt. So it's a little different. So here he shows a short hoof, and I must say from the little bit I know about farriery, this is a very well short hoof. Every nail sits on the same line. Excellent work. And the clip is straight in the middle and very well dressed around. You see that here, a little bit dressed on the top. Nicely done. There's nothing to be said that's negative about this shoeing job if you want to have shoes on your horse. Then this may be a farrier that you would pick because this looks like a good one. And here he shows different works of his. When I see a frog like this frog really has no prayer to expand, and it will only get worse. And I'll show you this in a little bit why this happens. It is also trimmed down pretty well, so this frog also has no chance to make contact with the ground. Front hoof, round, hind hoof, more oblong. So this is, again, this is well done. Very, very wide shoes. Farriers have very different opinions when to put a wide shoe on, when to put a rim shoe on. There is a reason why this is named a science. There's quite something to learn if you want to get into this. Then he talks about problem feet and what would be ideal. These are all drawings. I could use those and make all kind of corrections to them and explain things on them. And we get to quite a few of them. We will get to founder, to clubfoot, to a dropped sole, or actually to a sunk coffin bone. We will talk about contracted feet, coon feet, and the brittle foot we will address even today. So sloping heels or underslung heels, we just name them sometimes something else. Stumpy or straight heels, I have never seen in such a conformation, but we'll see. Then on this slide he is talking about what you should ask for your farrier, and you could just, in most cases, except for the first thing, you could replace this with hoof care professional. Is the hoof care professional member of the American Farriers Association? There was a time, this is just for entertainment, there was a time where some barefoot trimmers tried to join the American Farriers Association in order to get an inside track. It failed because the American Farriers Association promotes nailing on shoes, and you cannot undermine this, not even if you pay your membership fee. But it's a good idea when you get a professional to ask them for the level of their certification, if they have a certification, period. And farriers are either certified or they are certified journeyman farriers. I believe this is the difference between having a degree and having a master's degree, something like this. What is their fee? That's good to know. Do they shoe hot or cold? That is also, if you are into getting your horse short, good to know. What is their experience? I would ask that one first, and then their certification, and then the next one, number of hours spent at continuing education programs, and what do they expect of a horse owner? And these are all good questions to ask your hoof care professional. If your hoof care professional gets grumpy about answering this or irritated, then this is the first sign not to hire this person. Very important. So what do farriers expect of their clients? And this is a little bit what we expect of our clients as well. Prompt payment. This means when I'm there. Facilities in which you can do a good job, not a muddy field in the middle of nowhere. Horse handling, either that the horses can be handled and have had some training, or that the horse handler is reasonably capable. Well-mannered horse, very important. I trimmed Sunday morning 6 horses and one was easier than the next. Really no problem. They all picked up their feet and they stood without being tied or anything, like little lambs. What a joy. Was really great. And you like to go back to a client like this was much easier than to one where you have to wrestle. And that the horses are not neglected. So this was his list of what he expects from the client, and this is the website of the American Farriers Association. His references are the regular references that everybody uses. Everybody uses Butler and Stashak, and these are their Bibles for horseshoeing. Even so, there are some newer books out there that are actually rather good. So, and if you're interested in ever looking into this, here again is the website, and you can go to this website and amuse yourself for a little bit. It is always good to know the competition. And the whole reason we are doing today's presentation is because you are often, if your horse is barefoot, you will often be asked why you keep your horse barefoot. And if you can remember just a few points of the ones we raised today, then you have a lot easier talking to people. So let's get to what we don't like about shoeing. And this is the first one. The shoe is nailed on when the hoof is lifted off the ground. Therefore, it is fixed in its most narrow contracted state. If you think about it, when the hoof is weight-bearing, only then is it expanded, does the hoof capsule become expanded. When you pick it up, it is in a non-weight-bearing state, so it's not expanded. And this little animation from Peter Speckmeier in Germany shows what happens with the nailed-on shoe when the hoof starts growing. As the shoe doesn't move, the hoof grows into a narrow state. You can see it here in the very beginning. Look into this area, how this is a little wider, and then at the end when it has grown that 1.5 centimeter or centimeter down, it becomes more narrow. And it never can get out of really this narrow state. It can only become more narrow. But it cannot become any wider at any given time, 24/7. The only time this hoof can relax is when the shoe comes off. So this leads certainly to contraction, and there have enough studies been done to prove this. This leads to a certain amount of pain, changes in movement, to tripping, to muscle problems, to joint ossification, to thrush, navicular problems, white line disease, you name it, the shoe causes all of it. That doesn't mean some of these things don't happen with bad trimming, but they are exacerbated with shoeing. One more time. Then the nails that perforate the hoof wall cause structural damage. And that structural damage is that the insulation of the hoof capsule is breached. We talked about this, how the hoof capsule is in hoof function, how the hoof capsule is a terrific insulator. And that insulation is breached when you nail iron nails into the hoof wall, because that conducts cold and hot into the hoof, into the inside of the hoof, much easier than if the hoof is bare. And with this cold getting into the hoof, metabolism in the hoof is reduced, and as a result of the reduced metabolism, you have less horn production. And we all know this, all of us who have had shod horses, the hoof grows in the winter time a little bit less. In the summertime, during the warm months, it grows a little bit easier. So that has something to do with being shod and being exposed to the cold and reduced metabolism. In a shod hoof, as we have seen in the animation, the hoof mechanism cannot function, and it functions improperly. When the horse becomes weight-bearing, it only functions here at the only movement you get is here at the coronary bulge. You don't get any movement, as you see on the right side here, through the entire bottom of the hoof, through the entire corium. You only get it up here because this cannot move. The sole can't move, the bars can't move, the wall doesn't move. The wall only moves a little bit up here, but not where it is nailed shut. And that again leads to circulatory and metabolic problems. Dr. Bauke refers to a shoe as a peripheral loading device and is very convinced that this peripheral loading device stresses the laminar connection and causes also demineralization of the coffin bone. He has proven this in his research, that demineralization of the coffin bone is happening in shod horses, and he is convinced that this is a huge part of horses being not sound. So he comes at it from a little bit of different direction than we do, but it all comes back to the same thing: shoeing is evil. So, and again, this leads to metabolic disruptions and causing, when the whole hoof mechanism doesn't function and the laminar connection is stressed, this leads to protein imbalances in the system, because the waste protein that builds the hoof wall is not excreted, and as this is not excreted, it gets stored in the skin, the kidney, and liver, and you have horses, especially now in the summertime, that have liver problems and they get sunburned. This is a metabolic problem. Putting sunscreen on is not the answer for this. Giving the horse hoof mechanism and detoxing it is the answer. Here we are looking into the inside of a hoof capsule, And what you may not know is that when a shoe strikes hard ground, may this be the asphalt between the barn and the arena, or you ride out and you walk on the road, you trail ride and you walk on the road, or you have just plain hard ground, then the shoe vibrates on hard ground at 800 hertz. That is quite significant. And this vibration destroys these very sensitive laminae in the hoof capsule. And you see this here. And you can, when we take hoof capsules apart, then we can tell which horses have been shod and which horses not, mainly by how the laminae look when we take this hoof capsule apart. In a healthy hoof, these laminae are just straight sheets. There is no deterioration, and you see how riddled this is. This comes from the vibration, and this vibration degenerates the capillaries, leads to tissue necrosis, and also to pathological alterations of the corium tissue. This doesn't happen when you just have the shoe on for 2 shoeing cycles and then take it off again, but it does happen if you keep the shoe on. And it's a slow process, but it will happen without question. Many of you know that a lot of dentists and jackhammer operators have to retire early and get a condition named Raynaud syndrome. This is where the capillaries in their fingers and hands get destroyed and they can't feel anymore. And this is the same thing that happens in the horse's hoof through shoes. There is a reason why a lot of people want to ride their horses in soft, cushy arenas, and why they're complaining when the footing isn't optimal, because then their horses can't move optimal and they will become lame. They are not conditioned to work on such ground. So then we have the changes in weight bearing, breakover, and limb movement. Because the weight, shape, and properties of the shoe cause muscle and tendon problems, side bone, ring bone. They also cause something named overreaching. That means that the horse clips with the hind shoe the bulb of the front foot, and this is very, very painful. And the breakover in itself, when you look at the shoe, how it sits flat on the ground, you can see that the breakover doesn't work properly. Even so, they have put it cleverly with the shoe back here. That makes it a little bit easier, but still, if the horse lands heel first, he still has to go from here in the back to there in one click. There is no engaging the whole hoof and hugging the ground and making contact. It's just not happening. This was the best picture I could use to illustrate impaired shock absorption. I just cannot see how the hoof would absorb shock if it is shod like this and looks like and is trimmed like this. And impaired shock absorption leads to ossifications, joint damage, and arthritis, because the hoof mechanism cannot function, and with the non-functioning hoof mechanism, 60 to 80% of the shock absorption are lost. The jarring of the horse's unshod leg cantering on pavement is less than the jarring of a short horse walking on pavement. So a short horse walking on pavement receives more jarring and vibration than a horse that canters on pavement but is barefoot. I find these rather dramatic findings. When we have unphysiological stresses on the hoof capsule through a shoe like that, there is just no turning back. Thus, if you take the shoe off a horse that is short like this, you may well have a long period of rehabilitation. Shoes like this are put on to prevent hoof cracks, to prevent white line separation, bruising, but they don't. All these things come back because the horse is such a heavy animal and everything rests on this hoof, and if this hoof is not functioning properly, it destroys itself. It just doesn't work with a shoe. I always have to repeat this. An excellent farrier can keep a horse around for quite a while, but that is not the way to go. There must be a better life for a horse than to just kind of keep it around. So it's kind of like putting somebody on an oxygen tank instead of suggesting he should stop smoking. It's not the solution. It's a band-aid. Another thing that happens with shoes because of reduced circulation is reduced nerve function, and horses just cannot feel the damage in their hoofs. So when you look at this shoe, it's a beautiful shoe. Somebody has really thought about this and done a great blacksmithing job on this. But this shoe weighs about 800 grams. That's a pound and a half. More than a pound and a half. That is the same amount the hoof capsule weighs. And when you think about this, hoof capsule is the same weight as the shoe. There come other things into consideration, and that is centrifugal forces. If the horse throws his foot out there, may this be to the front, and has additional weight on the foot, he just throws it a little bit farther than what's good for him. And that puts extra strain on the ligaments, and it alters the gait, and it consequently causes damage to not only the horse but also to humans, because if this hoof tries to make contact with your head with a shoe on, you are most likely going to be dead. You have a slight chance of survival, depending how you get hit, when the horse hits you with a bare hoof. And the other thing is that with a shoe on, the traction is changed. We had talked about how a barefoot can keep good traction on ice and on big round rocks and hard surfaces. With a shoe, you have no traction on hard surfaces and on ice. Quite the contrary. They become excellent sliders. And in hard ground, in soft ground, the shoe digs in and holds the foot longer in place than the rest of the body, and even so this is just a moment again, it adds up, and over time these horses have muscle and tendon and ligament injuries, and we're wondering where this came from. Well, the hoof holds the shoe holds the hoof to the ground longer than it really, the natural barefoot would stay there. So the next thing that happens is with shoes we get conformation changes, and these conformation changes kind of sneak in because of the way the horse is shod. It is amazing to me often what I see in shoeing jobs when I go in to take the shoes off, or the shoes just have been taken off, and when I point out to the horse owner how his horse is unbalanced, he says, I never saw this before. But with the shoe it's not as apparent, because a whole lot of things work kind of like as if you had a big band-aid on with a shoe on. So these conformation changes go a little bit further up. They lead to offset knees as well. They lead to the famous hunter's bump, because nothing really works in harmony. If you nail a piece of steel, or you put a piece of steel between your foot and the ground, you have no contact to the ground anymore. You are not grounded. Neither are these horses. And snort, rattle, and roll, this is your shod horse. This is the horse that is always in flight mode. Or he has totally given up. We talk about that next time when we talk about psychology. Young horses do not have a fully grown coffin bone. The coffin bone takes till the horse is 5 years old to fully develop, to have all the palmar processes developed to the back. So when the thoroughbred industry or the halter industry puts shoes on these very young horses, yearlings, 2-year-olds, these feet are not developed. Then later on they say, well, this horse just didn't grow enough hoof. They have bred the hoofs of the quarter horses. No, they actually shod the hoofs of the quarter horses. If a horse is shod at all, it should not be shod before he's 4 or 5 years old. Better 5 years old. Better not shod at all, but the hoof, the coffin bone develops till the horse is 5 years old. And if you bind, like Dr. Cook names it, the foot binding of the horse through the shoe, if you bind the hoof, then the coffin bone doesn't develop. And this is rather detrimental to the future of this horse, and a lot of horses are almost useless when they get out of these careers. A few thoroughbreds make it as riding horses later on. Very few halter horses make it beyond being trail horses. The next thing that is really hard is the shoe on the terrain. If you have pastures like this, because your horses have shoes on, every time they make a step, it's like a little plow, and they turn your entire pasture around. And there is a good reason why a lot of barns say no, the horses can only be turned out an hour or two, because otherwise our pastures won't hold up. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And not only does the shoe plow through the ground and destroy the pastures, but it also destroys the trails. In Germany, where I spend most of my riding time, we had to have already in 1971 or 2 numbers on our horses so that we could be identified by the general population if we galloped through soft trails and left damage to those trails, and we would be reported. So everybody got a little calmer then and was a little less rambunctious about this, but it was the shoe who did the digging. And lastly, what happens is that with a shoe on, you cannot detect early damage. As the shoe prevents proper nerve function, you will always, when you have a short horse that gets lame, you have a lot of damage that you would in a barefoot horse have seen long coming. Because a bare hoof reports the damage much earlier than a short hoof. So much for the detriments of this. I hope this was enough that you never put a shoe on again. But to say this again, not everybody will take the shoes off tomorrow. And it doesn't help to go out and try, this is my experience, and try to shake them and say you must take the shoes off. But if you yourself have good hoof care on your horses, it will definitely help to show them how healthy and vibrant your horses are and how well this works. The same with riding, and I say that again, with the bitless bridle. Metal and horses don't mesh. I started a new customer 2 weeks ago. I was there last Sunday again. On Saturday they came by and picked up my bitless bridle because the daughter had picked up my book about the bitless bridle a week before and had read the book and said, I never put a bit in my horse's mouth again. So that's the way you can change people, by educating them but not getting in their face and saying they must change something. Educate them. If you have a chance and you have a group that will listen to you, I'll be glad to supply you with the PowerPoints that it takes to hold a little bit a demonstration about what shoes can do to your horse's health, or other things like anatomy or whatever you want to teach. Let me know and I help you out. The more we can spread the word, the better it gets, but we have to spread the word. So, now we all have shoes on, how to remove it. And this can, when you do this the first time, this can be a chore. And don't go into this at the end of a long day. You may want to start this at the beginning of the day. This requires a few skills. And I just want to go real quick with you through those skills. You put the hoof forward on a hoof stand. And when you have it on the hoof stand, you take your rasp, and I told you that it has some fine teeth here on the outside, on both sides. You can use that, or you can use the fine side of the rasp, and you rasp off the nail clinches. The nail is hammered in from the shoe side, and then where it comes out of the hoof capsule on the other side, it is turned so that it holds. And you have to rasp that clinch off. If you rasp this off totally and really to the point where you only see the thickness of the nail and none of the clinch anymore, then you can pull the shoe off. You also can open the clinches with this clinch cutter, but you have to have a clinch cutter and you have to have a hammer. And you set this clinch cutter here with this edge under the clinch and then hammer it from here till the clinch opens. The rasping is really a more elegant way, and it requires one less tool. Once you have the clinches open, you can pull the nails out with a crease puller, like this one here, or you can use a shoe puller and pull the nails out with this. In both cases, this only works if you have enough nail head left in order to pull that out. If you can't grab the nail head anymore with the crease puller or with the shoe puller, then you have to just wrestle it off. And the way you wrestle this shoe off is by grabbing it under the end of the shoe on one side, and with the shoe puller, do not use your nippers, you will destroy your nippers. This shoe puller costs $25 or so at any hardware store. Use something cheap. And you use that shoe puller and you go diagonally across the hoof and loosen that shoe. Then you can hammer it with the shoe puller a little bit back and pull the nails out. And then you repeat the process on the other side till the shoe comes off. It takes a little bit muscle. Well, maybe it takes a lot of muscle. Depends. How muscular you are and how strong you are. I find the solution much more elegant to just go ahead and have the shoes removed by a farrier before you come to trim. I think that's a little bit easier on you. But if you want to be the horse owner's hero, you have to pull the shoe. And you get better with every time you do this. So, problems after removing the shoes. Another thought on learning how to remove the shoes, if you're in this as a professional, you could just go around with a farrier for a day or two and remove all the shoes for him. He would be glad to have you do that. He shows you one time and then he has to pull the shoes. And I cannot imagine that a farrier wouldn't be delighted one day not to have to pull shoes. And you will be rather sore at the end of the day, but it's an invaluable skill. Problems after removing the shoes. Now we have them off, and now what? Now, potentially, all hell breaks loose. The other potential is nothing happens. Both scenarios I have seen have been there, done that. Can hardly say before when happens what. There are a few things where you can say this is a more difficult case than others when you have already diagnosed pathologies, when you have long-term lamenesses, when you have a horse that was shod with egg bar shoes and really, really good clips on and tight nails for years, you will have certainly problems when you remove the shoes. But I think we can minimize these problems. And I like to talk to you about this. This is something that's really close to my heart. The first thing that happens, or one of the things that happens, not the first thing, one of the things that happens is that the edge of the horn breaks out, and that is simply because if a horse has been shod for a long time, he has grown inferior horn, not enough metabolism, not enough circulation, all these things, and not enough horn production, and the horn that was produced wasn't all that hot. So that horn breaks easier than the horn in a not shod horse or in a horse that only had shoes on for one time. That sometimes happens, that you buy a horse and because the seller wants to make the horse pretty for the buyer and really want to move this horse, this has happened to one of our students, bought a horse that only had the shoes on for 1 or 2 shoeing cycles. They just want to make the horse pretty to move him. And this horse had no problems once the shoes were off, period. This breakage can be avoided by just giving this a nice round rolling when you take the shoe off, and not just trimming this flat and level with the ground. If you trim a hoof flat and level with the ground, the edges break out easier than if you roll the edge. I think that's no question. The next problem that we're going to have is hoof flexion. When the circulation returns to the hoof, you will have sensations in this hoof that are not necessarily pleasant for the horse. If the horse has a lot of damage in his hoof, then that circulation will bring with it a certain amount of inflammation, a certain amount of nerve function, and the horse will all of a sudden feel things that he hasn't felt before. Therefore, we really, really urge you not to trim the hoof after you take the shoes off first, unless this is a situation where you know the shoe was only on for a very short time. If you have long-term shoeing on a horse, take the rehabilitation a little slow. Leave the hoof capsule as it was, round the edge a little bit and walk away. And let that horse get used to the hoof mechanism, to the restored circulation first. Let the circulation restore carefully and not so all of a sudden at once. You know how painful this is if you put a rubber band real tight around your wrist and let it sit there for quite a while. Let it sit there for an hour and then take that rubber band off. And you are not going to be happy about how this feels. So when the shoe comes off, the whole hoof starts moving inevitably. And some things that can happen if you trim this hoof to full specifications, as I was once taught, then all of a sudden the skin between the hoof bulbs stretches so much that it cracks, and that must be painful. I would rather not introduce too much hoof mechanism. Taking the shoe off reduces hoof mechanism in itself, and leave this horse as sound as possible, if it's possible. I know it's not always possible, but leaving the horse as sound as possible so that the horse owner will stick it out and not say, well, we took the shoes off, my horse was 4 weeks lame, then I put shoes back on. It is really, really important that when you take the shoes off, that your horse does not walk away totally lame. Horse owners don't take well to this. You could get local infections in form of abscesses, but in my experience, the abscesses don't come right away after you take the shoes off. The abscesses come when the horse's whole organism is ready to heal. In the very beginning, it's too busy dealing with all the new stuff. And then when it gets a little healthier and things are working in unison again, then the body says, okay, now let's look here, is something that we have to push out, and it starts to push out an abscess. It doesn't always look this ugly, but the horse could get very, very lame abscesses are very painful, and we will talk about this in a later session. And I know you hear this a lot, but trust me, we have 20 more hours to go. So the other thing that becomes very apparent when you take the shoes off is that you have now all of a sudden trimming errors that become super apparent, like long bars and this whole hoof being trimmed with the wrong heel points and all these things. If you have the shoes taken off by a farrier, please ask the farrier not to trim the hoof, because they inevitably will take some more toe off where you need it desperately. And you also will see now some existing damage, like in this hoof. Now finally I get to use my little drawing tool again. This line here is where the hairline is. Oops. Maybe I can make this a little straighter. So P2, the short pastern bone, is sitting far more in the hoof capsule than it should be. The extensor process here is here of the coffin bone, but it really should be here. It should be at the edge of the coronary band. And this, what you see here, is often diagnosed as a thin sole, because there's not a whole lot of room between here and here. But what it really is, it is a sunk coffin bone. It is a coffin bone with an inferior laminar attachment. And this inferior laminar attachment allows the coffin bone to sink down, and therefore you will have no solar concavity. You will lacking solar concavity. You have a very flat sole, and you have most likely a not so happy horse, because this is painful. So this happens when you take the shoe off and then you trim this horse so it has full hoof mechanism. Not always, but it happens sometimes. And so again, I advocate not to do this, not to trim right away. I give you my recipe in a moment. I know we're late, too much material here. But we're going to be done in a moment. Also, after a few days, you may, if you take the horse's shoes off, you may call in somebody who does good body work and help this horse to relax all these stressed parts of his body. The sooner you get this done, the easier it will be for the horse. Body work is really important after the shoes come off. I have this in my rehabilitation contract. Massage therapy has to be paid extra, but it's not optional. So if a horse comes here, you have to pay for body work, for massage therapy. The other thing that can happen in a long-term short horse and that you may have to deal with when the shoes come off, and that is organ damage, because when the shoes come off and you have restored circulation and the horse is very compromised, you could potentially get toxins floating all through the body, and the already weak liver, kidney, heart can't deal with this. This is another reason why it is really, really important to turn the horse out and not have him stand in a stall, because if he does move, he moves the toxins. Otherwise, they go to the weakest link and they destroy the horse right there. So in conclusion, while this all sounds very harsh, I have only said this to make you aware of all the possibilities, and so that you hopefully get a little glimpse into this, how to talk to a horse owner, or how to talk to your friend that says, you have a barefoot horse, what can I do? Can we take the shoes off and you show me how to trim, and here we go. There are a few caveats to this. Work with very compromised horses in very small steps. Be there all the way, but do not overdo anything. You can always do in 2 days a little bit more, but don't just jump in there and go full hoof mechanism, full trim, full everything. We're going to adjust this to every level. No. The body just can sometimes not take it, and when you take a shoe off and the horse goes to its knees because it's in so much pain, this is not easy to deal with. What I do when I get a horse into rehabilitation with shoes on, first of all, the shoes stay on, and I start a detoxification process in a holistic way with homeopathics with this horse. Then I take the hind shoes off. And this all depends how compromised this horse is. I also taken a lengthy history of this horse. I want to know everything as far as the owner knows it. And if the owner doesn't have a lot of answers, I will be a little bit more careful. Then I take the hind shoes off and do not trim. 2 weeks or 4 weeks later, depending how compromised this horse is, I trim the hind feet and take the front shoes off. Again, I will not trim the front feet. I leave them as they are. And if this is a very compromised horse, I have tons of rubber. So this horse stays on rubber. Then I take the front shoes, then I trim the front feet finally after 6 to 8 weeks. This is how long it takes. By this time, the horse is detoxed fairly well, has gotten better nutrition to support the rebuilding of all the tissues, and we usually can do it that way in a much more efficient way. It looks a little bit slow in the beginning, but it works in the horse's favor. Also, horses that do not have a lot of pain heal faster. This is the same for humans. This is just a fact that without pain you heal better. However, next question that I just could hear coming is, then why not give them a painkiller? Because that's in general a chemical, and the horse doesn't have then control over what it's doing with its body, and I'd rather have him a little bit in pain and be careful than to race around and do more damage than there is already. So, sorry, this was probably the longest lecture you had to listen to so far, and I would now like to invite your questions.